You got your Mac and Mac guys, Jody McDonald and John McMullen here with Young Birds 365. We are joined by Neil Stratton from InsideTheLeague.com. Some of you may recognize his face. He was on with Rick Saratella here on the channel last year, and he's good enough to jump on board with us here today. Neil, for those guys who don't know about your website, if anybody were to go to InsideTheLeague.com, what would they find there?
We service the NFL agent and scouting communities. This time of year especially, we're tracking the hiring and firing that takes place within the game, within the scouting departments. Typically, once the draft is over, that's when that kind of starts to commence. And you have about a 60 to 90-day cycle when teams are kind of cutting guys, bringing new people in, elevating people, sometimes reassigning scouts to different areas. And so that's something we track pretty aggressively on our Twitter account at Inside the League. But we also have a blog, which is succeedinfootball.com, in which we talk about different areas of interest to people who are interested in the game behind the game, the business of the game. Again, especially as it relates to player representation and player evaluation. And we also have a pretty popular newsletter that comes out on Friday. It's called the Friday Wrap. You can sign up for that on our Twitter account.
Yeah, Neil, I always joke, the NFL is sort of America's passion. And there's one part of it that very few understand. And it's the part that you cover. I would say they like 80% of the oceans are undiscovered, uncharted, because it's so vast. That's how I feel about scouting in the NFL. It's like, for me, I never learn more about the game than when I talk to scouts. Mm-hmm. Those guys teach me the most about the game, and nobody knows about them. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's sort of on the back burner all the time?
It's I think that scouts are they have a very intriguing job, but as you alluded to, it's kind of an unknown job. I think it's partly because scouts still operate. They're not really on the front lines. I mean, the coaches you see walking the sidelines, and sometimes they're quoted and all those kinds of things. But scouts are still, part of their job is to be anonymous and to be secretive. And so I think that's kind of baked into it. Part of our newsletter on Fridays is we go out and we interview a retired scout. And we have a lot of scouts who've been retired for years and still don't want to talk to us because they're used to being introverts. They don't like that I think they get nervous talking to anyone that brings any kind of exposure to them. So I think it's just kind of baked into the process that the secrets are part of the game and part of what they want. And I guess that's to some degree by design. I will say this, John. When I started Inside the League in 2002, I said, listen, if I find out nothing else except for why people draft the people they draft, I'll consider this a success. By that definition, ITL is still a terrible failure because I have no idea why teams do the things they do. But it's still fun to try to figure it out.
Rick, I don't know if you know, but Neil, excuse me. My dad was the general manager of the New York Mets, the St. Louis Cardinals, and Detroit Tigers. So one of the things he used to tell me is an underrated part of his job was he has to scout his own scouts because some scouts are more easily grading and a little bit more likely to use some hyperbole and overstate and the like. And that's just the way that they scout. That's the way they file reports. That's the way they describe players when they get to talk to the general manager. And other guys are harsh. And they don't really like anybody. And if he likes them, at least, oh, my God, this kid must be a player because he hates everybody. He said a huge part of the job is scouting the scouts because he had X amount of scouts, and they were all different in the way they looked at the game, described the game, scouted the same, filed reports on the game. That's a big part of it. Is there a general manager that you've come across in the NFL that's really good, you think, at scouting his own scouts?
Well, obviously, we're here to talk about the Eagles a little bit, and I think Howie Roseman qualifies. I think when I was doing a little bit more research on their scouting department, I didn't realize how diverse the scouting department is for the Eagles. And when I say that, I don't mean just skin color. I mean, they've got more representatives in their front office from different teams than almost any other scouting department that you'll find. There are a lot of them out there that really try to build from within and try to raise the guys up and promote them and what have you. I think to Howie's credit, he's really gone out and tried to pick some of the best apples off of other trees and bring them in and develop them and put his own spin on things. I think we've also seen him, John Dorsey came in for, I think it was a year, maybe 2 years ago or something along those lines. Yeah. Dorsey is a little bit prickly and has had a lot of stops in his career, but you can't deny the fact that he really knows talent. And what I've been told when I've talked to other scouts is, Howie was able to kind of learn, especially how Dorsey values athleticism, and he's made that a bigger part of his drafting and a philosophy and how he kind of implements that. And I think, again, that's to his credit. But with respect to grading the scouts themselves within teams, that's another thing that I've never really found anyone to do except for one team. That was the Arizona Cardinals. And they had a metric for, and I don't even know how they did it, but I know that they honored one scout a couple years ago for the number of players he could bring in. But it's really hard to gauge because you've got scouts who come from different areas, who've got different strengths, who cover different regions of the country that, and some may be a lot thicker in talent, for example, the Southeast versus the Northeast where you've got, fewer players. So how do you gauge that? I mean, is it based on how many starters you bring in, how many UDFAs a team signs? I guess all those things kind of go in, fold into it, but it's really hard to figure out and objectively look at who's good and who's not. And so most teams fall back on who am I comfortable with, who knows my system, who knows this team, and rely and hope that is good enough to make it all count on draft day.
Speaking of Howie, and I think he's come such a long way, right? I mean, he was a salary cap guy at first, and he learned from so many different people, starting with Andy Reid, and he'll give Andy a ton of credit. But you mentioned he always brings in guys like John Dorsey. Dave Caldwell's in there now, former GM in this league. Matt Russell, big time personnel guy. And he's learned so much over the years. I see the same thing with Alec Halaby's as assistant GM, sort of started out as an analytics guy. Now he's breaking down film with the best of them. But, one thing I noticed, Neil, is past couple years, and I'll use your Twitter account as an example of this. I think your last two moves were Maya and Callender, hired as a scouting assistant with the Patriots. She used to work for the Eagles. Tom Hayden got a promotion in Houston. He was with the Eagles back in the Andy Reid era. There's been so many hires from Brandon Brown and Ian Cunningham, and Howie's had to roll this thing over. Do you find when teams are looking for scouts, there are certain teams they go to and certain teams they try to pick from?
I would say for probably 10 years, about from 2010 to right around 2020, the vogue team was the Patriots. And everyone wanted to bring in an expatriate. Saw so many teams that were hiring former Patriot staffers as GMs. You're still seeing that. I mean, Dave Ziegler in Las Vegas, Nick Caserio in Houston, my hometown. But I think there are waves that go, obviously as teams have more success. And yes, I do think the Eagles are a team that is seen as one that, where you can go and find guys. I mean, I think a lot of people in the league thought Joe Douglas was going to be an instant success in New York. And that hasn't happened per se. But I do think you see them turning the corner, and that's just one example. And I have to brag on Ian Cunningham. Ian, this is how old I am. I ran the Hula Bowl in 2008. Ian was one of my guards on the team. Jordan Dizon, the national scout for the Eagles, was one of my linebackers. So again, that's where all this gray came from. But again, Ian's going to be a GM in this league at some point. Turned down the Arizona job, but had that opportunity. He'll have other opportunities. Brandon Brown, who's with the Giants, I think, is another guy who'll be a future GM. Andy Weedle with the Steelers, who's really putting his stamp on things over there, is a guy. And so, I think not only are teams starting to look to the Eagles for candidates, there are a lot of guys that are really on. They're in the on-deck circle for GM jobs right now, and we're going to see that very soon.
Neil, you authored Moving the Chains and Scout Speak.
Yes, sir.
I want to talk about the latter half of that, Scout Speak, because in an industry like that, Yeah, it gets its language of its own, and there are certain phrases that are used, and a lot of people use them, and just someone from the outside look, well, what the hell do they mean by that? But scouts know exactly what they're referring to if scouts are talking to scouts. What are the phrases that you think just like really hit home? That man, that describe. I understand exactly what he's trying to say with that phrase. And is there one that you go, yeah, that just doesn't work? Why the hell did they say it? That's not what I think when I hear that. Is there a phrase on each side that you either love or you still can't stomach because you think it's off base?
Well, the one that I think is most descriptive, and I'm going to have to clean it up a little bit, but
this is YouTube. Don't sweat it, buddy. Go with it.
When a guy is not as impressive with his pads off as he is with them on, they describe him as a guy who looks like 10 pounds of excrement in a 5-pound bag. I think that's a very colorful way of describing someone. We don't have the old school weigh-ins at All-Star games where we used to, where guys parade around in their trunks, literally.
Yeah.
But in the old days, that's kind of something you'd hear a lot of scouts say and just kind of rattle off, and that would be a pretty common phrase. I think one that we don't hear as often because it's not maybe up to modern standards, but looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane. Or one that I use a lot is looks great coming off the bus. That's
Nick Sirianni uses that a lot.
That doesn't always add up to the athleticism that a player has.
Yeah, Nick Sirianni uses that one a lot. But he uses it he uses it with good players. He's like Jordan Mailata, first guy off the bus. That's who you want. He uses that quite a bit. When it comes to the calendar, that's one thing I think fans don't understand as well, because most of the league works on the same calendar, right? Season ends, Super Bowl, you have the coaching hiring season, GM hiring season. Scouts are different. Scouts go from draft to draft, and then you see the movement. And there's we talked about the secrecy. Like, nobody knows who's under contract, who isn't under contract, who gets rolled over. Is there any tricks to kind of figuring that out? Who's available, who's not available?
Boy, I'd love to know, John, because that would be so indicative of who's kind of on the hot seat and who isn't. Typically, scouts are on 2-year deals until you get kind of to the director level and what have you. So who's on the second year, who's on the first year, who just got renewed? That's very difficult. 2 years ago when the pandemic hit in 2020, the NFL kind of just froze everything. And so if you're in the second year of your deal, you kind of got rolled over. If you didn't have time left, you got a free year. If you were, others, maybe they got 2 years, and that kind of threw everything off. And so the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of movement, a lot of changes, because a lot of those people that got automatically renewed or given an extra year, well, when the kind of pandemic was in the back, in the rear view, then teams started making a lot of changes they would have made a year ago or 2 years ago, what have you. Now that that's kind of washed out and a lot of those people that were kind of on deck for getting separated are gone, we're seeing fewer changes this year. And I think that's been one thing that's been substantiated, but so far, because it's been really slow in the first 2 weeks. But no, to answer your question, I don't know of a way, it's not published like player salaries and player contracts and all those kind of things, adding to the intrigue, adding to the mystery, adding to the whole, secrecy kind of thing of scouting, which I guess makes it so intriguing. So no, I don't know how to monitor that. I mean, it would be a great tool for me, but I've never seen it published anywhere, and I don't know that it is published anywhere.
Neil, as John just pointed out, and you confirmed, timing is everything, and the calendar is all important. And the NFL has their draft when they have their free agency, and then they have the draft. And then you have the players that are playing in the spring leagues, the XFL and the USFL, both of them on their own return type timeline. And they're a business entity unto themselves and trying to draw fans, again, television contracts and the like. But for the players, I got to believe about 90% of them want the growth to the National Football League. They're not in the XFL to stay in the XFL for the rest of their lives. And even with college players, when you go to college, 99% of them are open to go to the NFL. There's 1% that says, hey, I'm getting a free ride. I'm going to get my education. I'm going to go on to become the leader in this other industry. So timing is a big part of it. Do the XFL and the USFL have themselves in the right position on the calendar right now? We're seeing some guys sign this week, XFL first, because their season's over and done with. USFL still going. How are scouts treating this spring league?
I think that, scouts love to watch football. Obviously everyone knows about the combine, everyone knows about pro days and what have you. But there's still a lot of scouts that call that the underwear Olympics. They want to see guys play the game. The thing that's really interesting about the XFL is it kind of mirrors the pre-draft cycle. And I think we could see a time when some players opt to play in the XFL rather than go through and work out and do the combine and all those kinds of things, especially if the XFL can start to ramp up its salaries and what have you. And if that happens, I think that could be really interesting, a really interesting development. There was a player drafted by the Colts, a tackle out of Northern Michigan, who really seriously considered going to the XFL. And the XFL was seriously considering him. He's a project, a long guy. Jake Witt is his name. And kind of has some Jordan Mailata qualities. As a matter of fact, the Eagles, I know Jeff Stoutland talked to him pretty seriously late in the draft draft process and really looked at him. At any rate, I think the XFL set up right now in a great way because they can develop players during that phase. And then those guys are done, just in time for the draft and rookie mini camps and all those kind of things. The USFL, I think, obviously may have to shift its league play to do that. And I'm not sure they're going to be willing to, because then they've got to share the TV and the spotlight and all those kinds of things. And it's kind of a limited window. I hope that both leagues succeed. And I think everyone in the NFL does as well. But at the end of the day, it's how many butts you can get in the seats and how many viewers you can have on TV. And there's only so much, there's so much competition for viewership now. I don't know if they'll both make it or not. I hope they do. I'd love to see it. But I think right now, yes, it's a tremendous benefit to the NFL because not only does the NFL have the best minor league system, bar none, of all the four major sports in college football, now they've got yet one more layer of spring football that gives them another chance, another bite of the apple to really review these players, see how they're developing, see how they, perform under fire. And that's a tremendous tool.
It's funny you bring up Jake Witt. I had him going to the Eagles in one of my mock drafts, which are shots in the dark, Neil, as you know.
Sure.
But I said if there's ever a Jeff Stoutland guy, it's Jake Witt, because he's like former college basketball player, big, long guy, really developmental project. And they usually like to give Jeff one of those guys every year, just a developmental guy. But it got him Tyler Steen, who's a much higher prospect. So I guess that worked out for him. But Jody brought up the XFL, the USFL. I'm too old, obviously, but I go back to NFL Europe and the World League. The quarterbacks in those leagues, I think people forget. Brad Johnson got his first playing time there. Jake Delhomme got his first playing time there. Kurt Warner played in the World League. And that was back when you had two-a-days and you could practice and you could always be at the facility. And I still think those live reps really, really helped the quarterbacks. I think you can't duplicate them, even in practice. Now they don't practice. I mean, everything's scaled back. It's so hard to develop quarterbacks. Are we going to see a little bit of a groundswell of quarterbacks playing in the XFL, the USFL, getting reps? Or are people, coaches, scouts, just too hyper-focused on – I bring up Stout again because I talked to him way back when Jordan Mailata, before he became Jordan Mailata, there was the AAF, the Alliance of American Football, and they were talking about becoming a developmental league for the NFL. And we asked Jeff, hey, would you advocate Mailata going over there? And he was like, I don't want anybody touching them. Where do you think that sort of balancing line is with coaches, scouts about getting a player in their system and not wanting somebody else to mess with them?
My take on that is that the colleges are doing so much of a better job of developing these quarterbacks for the modern game. And the NFL has adopted so many college philosophies. I think right now the the progression is from college to pro as far as the innovation on the offensive side of the football and those kinds of things. As a result, I think we're seeing more passers that come into the league a little more prepared than they were. Where we're not seeing development is on the offensive lines and the defensive lines, especially the offensive line. You talk to a scout now, they can't find someone that they can evaluate in a traditional way because there's so many spread offenses and there's so many, zone blocking schemes and what have you. They want to see a guy that can get down in a three-point stance, fire out, and drive guy. That's if you watch. I watched the USFL pretty extensively last year before the XFL had come around, and you found these quarterbacks taking a snap and then running for their lives. I think what you're going to see is offensive line development in those leagues, and I hope that you start to see more and more players that might be IPP pathway guys that have the size and speed and come in and get kind of run to those leagues and develop as offensive linemen. I think that's where, if you talk to most scouts and most teams, the biggest need they've got is someone that can stop these pass rushers, someone that can dance on the edge and who can really be a guy that can mirror and protect the passer's blind side, especially. So I think quarterbacks are still valuable, and that's a great way to develop them. But I think more so, I think they need more development on the offensive line. And I think as you see more basketball players make the transition, as you see more players come in internationally, you're going to see them, especially if these leagues can stay around, you're going to see them run in there and get more and see that as kind of the lab, the crucible for offensive linemen, because I think that's where the league really needs help right now.
All right, I'm going to use a phrase my partner uses often. I'm going to borrow it / steal it here, and that's trickle up. We've seen over the last X amount of years aspects of college football, ways of playing, thought processes on how to be good on both sides of the ball come from college football and be initiated into the NFL. A long time ago, it was the NFL decided everything, and college football followed in lockstep thereafter to try and get their kids into the NFL. But college football has changed, and they are more driving the bus at times than the NFL is, trickling up. What's the next trickle up aspect that you're starting to see in college football that you go, yeah, maybe the NFL will think about that and adopt that going forward?
Well, I think from a style of play standpoint, we're seeing that right now. The Cliff Kingsbury model is not such a crazy idea anymore. But I think from a physical standpoint, the metric of size and height especially is what we've seen change so drastically. I mean, I remember when Kyler Murray was going through the draft process, I would talk to scouts who said, that's really short. I mean, he's an effective player, and we can do a lot of things with him. But at the end of the day, the guy's 5'8". The number one pick in the draft this year was well under 6 feet tall. No one's trying to act like he's really, he's almost 6 feet. No, he's not. He's well under 6. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. I mean, I think that you've seen the metrics on quarterbacks kind of thrown out the window. Whereas you wanted a 6'5" guy, that's not the case anymore. Nobody seems to care. And it's becoming less and less of a big issue. So from style of play, I think we're already seeing that come up. But I think what we're going to start to see is how every prospect is seen differently and what the bottom line, the hard triangle numbers are for those positions. So I think that's the next innovation that we're going to really see in the league.
All right. Last one from me. Make sure you follow Neil on Twitter at Inside the League. Does a tremendous job. InsideTheLeague.com. Sign up for the newsletter. It's tremendous. SucceedInFootball.com. If you want to become an agent, he'll even prep you for the agent test. To Jody's point, positionless football, especially on the back seven, on defense.
Oh, yeah.
You jumped in the green room. Jody and I were talking about linebacker. The Eagles have two, N'Kobe Dean. They say he's 220. You don't look 220 to me, Neil. Nicholas Morrow, about 215. Terrell Edmonds is a safety. He's the same weight. How close are we to this idea of positionless football? Basketball in a lot of ways has gone that way, especially on the back seven on the defensive side. From talking to scouts.
Yeah. Again, I mean, I had this conversation with a scout probably, 5 or 6 years ago, talking about box safeties, and he said, "Well, your box safety is really your will linebackers now. They're the guys that are 205 maybe, and that have changed. So yeah, it's pretty much after defensive line, all those guys are changing. What I'm waiting for is, because you're seeing the line now that we're in the age of the 215-pound middle linebacker, how much longer until we start to see a return to really the fullback and the power back and the 250-pound running backs? Because at some point you've got to see them start taking advantage of those light guys up front who are quick, but it may take 2 or 3 guys to bring down the bigger backs. And I think we're starting to see that, but we're not quite there yet. As far as the safeties that are interchangeable and not having a free and a strong, definitely, that's definitely here. I'm kind of waiting for the offense to rebound to that, though, and to change with that, because I think you're getting lighter and lighter and faster and faster. At some point, someone's got to take advantage of that with power football. It's not as sexy as what we're used to seeing, but it's certainly going to be effective, especially
Neil. You're a Texas guy. I'd love to see somebody try to tackle Earl Campbell in his prime. Some of these guys. I mean, I'm with you. I think somebody's got to react to this, but I don't know. Maybe they're just not developing those types of running backs now.
That's true. I think that's probably part of the problem. At some point, someone's going to have success with it, and it's not just going to be the Titans, and everyone's going to want to copy it. And so I guess we'll have to wait and see who that is.
All right, let's tie a couple of things together that you guys just discussed. Let's say the next Bijan Robinson is going to be playing in Houston, down in your neck of the woods, somewhere in Texas. Would anyone be shocked if the best running back in the country, high school level, was from Texas? No, that would be almost expected, not surprised by. But the next guy who looks like Bijan Robinson going into his senior year in high school football in Texas, as he's being recruited, he tells Nick Saban or any other top coach, listen, I'd really like to come to your university. You've seen some of my tape. I'm very good at catching the ball out of the backfield. I want to be a wide receiver. I know I played high school football, but I can read the tea leaves. In the National Football League, wide receivers get paid. Running backs get devalued. I'm this good. I'm this kind of athlete. Even though I'm playing running back on my high school team because we got a chance to win a state championship, and I love my teammates and the like, so I've been a running back. I want to stay a running back. When I come and play for you, I'm playing wide receiver. Are we going to see that? Or you're just suggesting that the pendulum may swing and swing even harder to a power smash mouth running game? Oh, I think we're years away from that. I think there's more of a chance that we're going to get lesser running backs because running backs are going to say, no, I want to be a wide receiver. That's the way the NFL looks at these positions these days. And I want to get paid from the day I walk in. By being a top 10 draft pick, is something like that more likely to happen than the return of the running back?
I think it's possible. I don't know that it's going to happen as much with the guys that are Bijan size, but I think the lesser size running backs that could fit as a slot guy, I think that makes a lot of sense. We're starting to see slot guys much more valued, getting paid in free agency and all those kind of things. And I think players are in tune with that. And so I could see that happening. The bigger guys, unless they can really run on the outside, I don't know that they're going to be able to make that switch as seamlessly. But the smaller guys, the water bug types, the guys that were, seen as the third down backs in the old days, they'd be perfect in the slot position. So I could see that. That would make a lot of sense. Haven't seen it yet, but boy, nothing's off the table these days. And especially, I think at the end of the day, if you're a touchdown scorer, you're gonna want to stay in a position like that, especially as the NIL era dawns and more players are getting paid and more valued on the college side. Then I think wherever a player feels like he's going to be able to have the most success and maybe see the most NIL compensation is where he's going to want to play. So we could see that. That's a possible innovation.
Yeah, keep your eye out for it. All right. Going to tap into your scouting expertise here. Okay. Everybody's already got mock drafts out for next year. That's the one. As soon as Mr. Irrelevant is selected, you're obligated to come out with your mock draft for the year thereafter. And most everybody has 2 quarterbacks at the top of the draft, Williams and May. I'm a big fan of both guys. I'm kind of proud that I jumped on the May bandwagon before a lot of other people did. Week 2 of this season, he went nuts in his second start after the Sam Howell era. And I said, man, this kid can spin the football. So they look like the top 2 draft picks. A lot of things can happen between now and next May when the draft happens. Comparing these two, and it's a look ahead to the quarterbacks that went in this year's draft. Same level, not quite as good, actually better than the 2 quarterbacks who went 1-2 in this year's draft.
I think that, I really like Williams. What he brings, the skill set he has, I think he's the guy that most teams are going to want in the NFL these days. May is more of a little bit more traditional, your traditional prospect as far as what you're looking for and all those kind of things. Which one are they better than C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young? That's a tough one. Neither one of them has enjoyed the success that Young and Stroud have enjoyed on the field. And I'm still kind of an old school guy. I really like the fact that these guys, the 2 at the top of the draft this year, really won. And May and Williams, I was really surprised to see USC lose to Houston. And to me, until those guys can produce on the field and lead their teams in a way that Young and Stroud have, I can't put them ahead of those guys. I also should mention there are a couple other interesting players for 2024. I mean, I think Quinn Ewers in Texas is a really interesting guy. I think he's eligible for the draft. And then Keaton Slovis is a guy to kind of watch out for. He was a guy that was really hard.
You still like him? I remember 2 years ago, people were talking about who's he transferred to this year.
He's in BYU, and everything's set up for him there. He's got a quarterback coach that he really likes. And if things go well, listen, guys, every year there's an out-of-nowhere quarterback that climbs the board, and nobody thought the guy was even on the radar, and suddenly he goes in the top 5 in the draft.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for Spencer Rattler to get back.
Spencer Rattler, look, there's another guy who's kind of reclamation project who could be, again, the top 5 pick. I mean, they play that position where people are going to fall in love with him. And so there's a lot of interesting quarterbacks in this upcoming draft class. I'm really eager to see
by the way, to defend Caleb Williams real quick, Neil, he can't play defense. Come on, Lincoln Riley.
Exactly. You're right.
Play some defense.
You're right. Yeah. I mean, he's electric on the field. Yeah. And there's no denying his athletic ability, and he's done it at 2 schools, and there's in 2 conferences, and he's an exciting player. I don't mean to be a detractor. Yeah. I think.
Now, I hear what you're saying.
People don't respect him. I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, Alabama, and recent history of Alabama quarterbacks. I mean, they're trained the right way. They understand how to play. Nick does it the right way, and they tend to be successful. Look at Jalen Hurts last year. He's got some Oklahoma mixed in, but I think that Alabama way is sort of time tested now.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Mac Jones deserves another chance. If my defensive coordinator was made my offensive coordinator, I'm not sure that I would succeed really well either. I think that guy
was talking about the Eagles defensive assistant coach now. Yeah, you got to be careful. They're going to come for you if you're getting on Mac Patricia's case. Now that he's wearing green, all is forgiven for his offensive coordinator work.
I don't get any angry letters or anything, but that was a tough situation that Jones got thrown into. We'll see what happens this year.
I too am a Mac Jones fan. Neil, great stuff. We appreciate you coming on with us today. I saw some of your stuff. Our buddy Rick Sarantella was retweeting your stuff. Said, "Damn, this is interesting. I think the Birds 365 audience would like it." We appreciate you sharing with us today, and we're definitely going to get you back on down the road.
A lot of fun, guys. Thanks so much for having me on. Y'all have a blessed day.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Neil.
Neil Stratton here with us on Birds 365, giving us a little bit of a different look. The scouting look, the agents look, how deals are done, and how the NFL goes about filling out its roster. Yeah, there's a whole new level to it with the USFL and the XFL now. Scouting, like football in general, is a 365 day a year proposition. All right, we are Birds 365. We come at you almost every single day. Yeah, they give us the weekends off, but we're Monday through Friday. Come back. I got a very specific question for my partner, and it's prepping for a season and prepping for specific opposition. I'll tell you what I mean when we come back here on Birds 365.